Larry Pressler. Would you welcome him, please? You're not used to handling that, but they don't applaud in Washington,
I don't
do they?
feel that I should be getting any recognition for doing what you're supposed to be doing. I'm a little, this is sort of a bizarre type of recognition, but I thank people very much.
What do you think of all the publicity?
Well, of course, we're in a sad state of affairs in Washington because of this, and really, I don't feel that I deserve any recognition especially, but I do think we need to go forward with the Ethics Committee and make some corrections after the grand juries, and I'd like to talk some more about that.
Yeah. Now, we have to pause for what we call station identification. All the stations around the country are waiting to barge in here at one time. But stay with us, and you'll hear Senator Pressler's story right after this. We'll come right back. Pressler from North Dakota, and he is going to tell his story right now.
Well, very briefly, to summarize the matter greatly, in November, and at this time I was a candidate for the presidency. I've since withdrawn. But
that's a shame.
But in any event, a social contact of ours had heard of a political action committee in Georgetown that was helping different candidates, and so she took me to this house, and I met with 4 persons who were FBI agents, but they were posing as private businessmen. Mm-hmm. And I've since been told by the director of the FBI that I wasn't under any suspicion or any cloud.
Well, then why did they bring you in if you weren't under any suspicion? Did you ask them?
I don't know. I think I might have been a wild card. I think that this lady lived in this neighborhood, and she might, or maybe I haven't been able to get much information so far. I'd like to. That's one thing I'm going to resolve to find out in the future. Mm-hmm. But in any event, we sat down. We started discussing. I guess all this is on videotape. We began to discuss some of their problems as businessmen, and which is a very normal thing. And they said they had some friends in the United Arab Emirates who, if their government ever fell, they'd want to get into the United States, and was there any way that that could be assured? And of course, there are regular procedures for people to apply to come to the United States, but also a senator can introduce what's called a private bill to get people in for 2 years. How long
does that take generally to do something like that?
Well, a senator can do it in 5 minutes.
I see.
But if you go through the normal processes, they take a long time. And you would do something like that, like if somebody had an emergency, an illness, their parents died, and the funeral was, or something like that, normally. But in any event, then the conversation turned to my presidential campaign. I was very active in Florida at the time, and we had just had a $10 per person Franks and Beans fundraiser the night before, and it had been in the papers that morning, and they said, we know you're short of money and so forth, and they said that they could very easily raise between $50,000 and $100,000. And I said, well, how would it be raised, at a dinner or through a political action committee? And they said, well, what is that? And then I said, well, I started asking about some of the campaign laws, and I became very suspicious. Yes, I became suspicious, and I said, look, I came over here with the understanding that this was a political action committee and so forth, and this could be illegal. I guess my memory is not entirely clear, but the FBI told me I used the word illegal 3 times, which they said was beautiful. But in any event, the point is that I decided to leave, but then they said, no, you're misunderstanding us. We're not trying to do anything wrong. We are just private businessmen, and we want to learn the correct way. And I said, well, we have some do's and don'ts on fundraising, and we'll be glad to provide it to you. And they went to great efforts then to prove that they were just private businessmen. So in some ways, now that I know they were agents, they were kind of misleading me, because I didn't report it because they didn't really offer me anything specifically, but they went to great lengths to say that they...
But they did mention a sum of money. How would you like to have?
No, they didn't say how would you like to have. They just said we could easily raise.
Oh, we could easily raise. I'm sorry.
And I guess under this scam operation, the subject has to suggest the crime. I mean, but in any event, then subsequently one of them came to one of our meetings and said, we really appreciate Senator Pressler setting us straight on campaign financing, and they took our do's and don'ts on fundraising for Larry Pressler. So I left the thing. I forgot all about them. I thought they were just businessmen who were getting involved in politics for the first time, who wanted to be involved and who wanted to learn the rules. So I forgot all about them until in February a Washington Post reporter called me and said, we have a statement from the FBI that you stalked out of the room and refused a bribe. But I really didn't, it really wasn't a clear offer at the time, but that's the story.
By the time it got to me, you had thrown him out of the room.
Well, I was very abrupt. I also felt that my time was being wasted because I had been, now it's quite normal to go off of Capitol Hill like if you're a candidate, you can't fundraise in your office or on federal property. So most political action committees, and there are those for labor, and there are ones for business and so forth, and they're legal, but usually you go off of Capitol Hill to have any sorts of meetings that regard a candidacy. So it wasn't an unusual situation, but I'm a little bit upset because there was no suspicion of me, or if there is, I'd like it to come forward. Of course, I guess in these scam operations, they have to test a broad sampling, and they have to have some people turn it down in order to make it be good in court.
Had you ever been offered bribes before?
No, not that I know of, and I wouldn't have recognized this.
What do you mean, not that you know of?
Well,
How
for
could you be
example,
offered a bribe and not know of it?
well, for example, in this case, I was not offered a bribe, but the circumstances were created under which I could have accepted one. And maybe if you turn off the conversation at an early stage, I don't know. Now, apparently the FBI had extensive evidence that there's a lot of bribery being done in Washington in order to apply the scam operation.
Really?
Well, I don't know. They should not apply the scam. Like against organized crime or against vice rings, they're supposed to have extensive evidence that there's something wrong, and that's the only way the FBI can get convictions against organized crime is through the use of the scam and videotape. This was the first time it's been used against Congress, so it comes to light about people's civil liberties and so forth. But it's a very tough question.
You have worked with many of the congressmen who are accused of accepting bribes before this. Did you ever think that any of these men would accept bribes?
No, I wouldn't. I served in the House of Representatives with some of these people, and I can't believe that they accepted bribes, and time will tell, of course, but I'll lose a lot of my faith in Congress. I came to Congress with the reform class of '74. We've been trying to reform Congress, but we've had a scandal every year, and the confidence of the people is very low, and the confidence in the dollar is affected by it.
Yes.
And our energy problem is not being solved, and we only have the support of 13% of the American people, or the respect, and it's hard to get good people to run for Congress under these circumstances.
Son?
Isn't it a little dodgy when the FBI sets up a situation like they did, and you get into a conversation? As you said, you didn't know you were offered a bribe, so you could have kept talking about the 50 thou or the 100 thou innocently, inquiring, and it seems like soon as they sucked you into that conversation, they've got evidence to talk about you taking some money. And from there, you know, sometimes you can go in with a murky picture, it seems to me, and maybe throw a lot of mud on a lot of people who might not have understood it as clearly as you did, because politics is a power situation. I mean, the politicians need that power to get what they're after. So in a way, it seems like a bad timing for the FBI. Who needs to get discouraged with our government anymore? I just question the way that was done.
You just said only 13% of the people have confidence. Why, at a time when it's so low, do something like this to further diminish that?
On a demoralizing campaign like that, I'm wondering who the bad guys are in that situation. You know.
Well, I'm wondering too. And it's a very difficult situation because, like, if these people had been my constituents, I'm sure I would have said, I'm going to do everything I can to help you in your objectives. And I certainly wouldn't have taken money from them. That's what I can't believe to this day, that so many people would actually take cash. And maybe time will prove me wrong. Maybe I'm just naive. But
well, couldn't some of them be involved from not taking cash but talking cash?
Yes, probably. Although I guess everybody who's going to be attempted indictments, they have to actually have taken cash.
I see.
But you could say things on tape that could be very embarrassing. You could,
right.
You know, in an informal conversation. So basically, I hope that subsequently that it will show that the FBI had substantial evidence that there was widespread evidence of bribery going on, which will sadden me a great deal about Congress, because they're not supposed to use the scam unless there is such evidence, and then they have to do sort of a random sampling. They can't just do it against people suspected, which is troublesome. It's a very difficult area of the law.
Sure is. I think it's dodgy on their end of it. The way it was approached sounds strange to me.
Senator Pressler, needless to say, when I read about this, I told my staff, I said, call him immediately, because I had a feeling, reading some of your quotes, that you were going to say at one point, enough is enough, I don't want to appear on any more television shows or be interviewed by anyone else. The whole world has converged upon you, I'm sure.
Well, a little bit, and you know, I've worked on legislation for several years and not gotten any recognition. In this case, I'm getting recognized for something that you really shouldn't be recognized for, because I don't think what I did was in any way heroic or any other. I just turned aside a potential what could have been a potential illegal situation, which I recognized as, which I was persuaded was just misguided people who came back to me and said that they were set on the straight and narrow path.
Well, we happen to think it's quite refreshing and quite nice, and we wanted you here to talk about it, and thank you for
Thank you very
agreeing to appear. Senator Larry Pressler.